Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 244, and we're going to talk about the stereotypical Trump voter, I guess, would be the best way of putting it. I noticed that, you know, very slowly I'm picking up listeners on YouTube and other platforms. I'm always amazed. I appreciate it. Basically, if you haven't heard any of my earlier episodes, I am the subjective professor. I used to teach full-time at a university, and then the woke mob got me. The new person controlling my contract was a was basically it was a trans activist, self-proclaimed trans activist, and I have a feeling that he didn't like a lot of the things that I said, which, you know, it's all speculation of what that might be. And then the first chance he got to not renew my contract, he did not. And so now I'm currently in arbitration. I've been waiting for my hearing to be held. I've been waiting for 2 years, but hopefully I'll finally get my day in court uh, this coming February. But basically, the episodes that I'm doing is what I did every day in class. I would begin the class with some random news story of the day, and then use that as a jumping off point to talk about the issues and concepts that were going to come up in the readings for that day. Sometimes it was hit and miss, sometimes people were interested in talking about it, and other times it was just sort of dead on arrival. But in any case, I just now continue to do what I did in class, talk about issues of the day, and give my thoughts on it. And in the process, try to give a different subjective perspective, at least in terms of how to interpret, how to react, how to respond, and or even help us to generate our own individual opinion on these matters. One news item that has been floating around a lot. I know I've been doing a lot of Trump episodes. I'm sorry, but that is like the most exciting thing that's been happening these days, right? And if you've been listening to my Trump episodes, and you know that there is might be something else going on there, and I'll get into that a little bit more, especially since this episode is called the Trump voter. But a lot of people have been speculating on his cabinet picks. There are lots of rumors. And I was listening to Judge Napolitano and the episodes that he did today on his Judging Freedom podcast. And the gentleman that he interviewed or talked with today discussed how there is a lot of disinformation or misinformation being spread by the Washington Post, Netanyahu himself, and other government operatives. They did want to make note, and they emphasized that normally when you do a transition, you plan it out in Washington, D.C., where you have access to talk to people, to meet with people. They withdrew to Mar-a-Lago in Florida, right? Just sort of cutting themselves off from Washington, D.C. It'd be like a A-list actor leaving Hollywood and living in, I don't know, West Virginia, right? Where you have no access to the paparazzi agents and whatnot. So you just take yourself out of that sphere of influence, and you really don't care if people don't come by, try to take your picture or not, right? Because you're focused on doing what you think that you need to do. And for that reason, I think that there is a little bit of hope that he did learn a lot of valuable lessons, and especially from my martyr man on a mission episode, it might be, I mean, it'd be unbelievable, really, for all of these things to happen to him over the last 8 years at least, and for him not to have learned some really, really serious lessons, right? I just can't imagine him being that dull or that, stubborn or narcissistic, even was a word that's thrown around a lot. So anyway, in the aftermath of the election of Trump, um, it. because I am all about race theory, right? I made note of this very early, but now's a chance to talk about it. Trump himself and the campaign did not focus on racial groups, right? He focused more on issues like the border, war, which affects everybody, right? Even the tariffs, which I really dislike tremendously, excuse me, doesn't really affect one ethnic group, racial group, any more than any other. Uh, when you get into industry demographics, then yeah, okay, yeah, very much so. However, aside from that, he didn't really focus on racial categories. And if you haven't listened to any of my race episodes from before, I define race as a generalization, uh, a category created on a single characteristic, identifiable characteristic, right? So a categorization, a generalization based on a single characteristic. Right. So anything can be a racial group, not just skin color, your religion, your height, the sport you play, uh, your hometown, anything, any descriptive that could be put on you can also serve as a way to categorize people, right? Person from the Midwest, person from the South, person from Europe, it doesn't really matter. Anytime you use any of these words, it evokes a kind of a stereotype. And that's the starting point for you to begin your conversation or your reading about that issue. And so Trump didn't really focus on issues such as that. He focused on things like the border, which affects everybody in the United States, war, which also potentially affects most people in the United States in a negative kind of way. And by focusing only on certain issues like the border or war or the economy, he's kind of goofy there too. But anyway, he got more black voters. He had got more Hispanic voters than any previous Republican candidates, right? He got more Amish voters, Muslim voters. He even got a lot of libertarian voters, Democrat voters, and also retaining some Republican voters. Now, keeping in mind that, the coalition that he created were mostly Democrats. I mean, think about it. These were all of them were Democrat lifers, and all of a sudden they found themselves, with the same positions, but basically ostracized and so far to the right of the radical Democrats that are in the Democratic Party now that they became Republicans. So that was kind of interesting, right? That the diversity that you saw on the Trump coalition and the voter is pretty amazing. It's diverse, and yet I will say there is homogeneity, right? It is homogeneous, homogeneous in the sense of freedom and peace, right? So it's diverse in the categories that society usually prioritizes in terms of skin color, ethnicity, demographic, whatever. But it's homogeneous in that everyone who voted for, uh, Trump supported the idea of peace, right? Let's change the direction away from different from the course that the Democrats are planning out. And so let's talk about the Democrats. The Democrats were all about diversity and tolerance, right? That's what they preach all the time. And they lost voters to Trump. In addition to the 10 or 15 million votes that seemed to disappear, they lost voters to Trump. And so you can see that the diversity that they talked about was fake diversity, right? It's diversity on their own terms, diversity their way. So if you're not practicing diversity in the way that they deem acceptable, then you weren't being diverse, right? So there was no room to be different. There was no room for dissent in that mindset. And so basically, it's a lot of intolerance from people who always preach tolerance. I made this sort of, I thought of something. I posted something on social media, not X. Well, I might have posted on X as well. which you can follow me there too if you want. But I might have voted for her if she said, end the Fed, stop the wars, release the Epstein list, get out of NATO, but she didn't, right? So that's the thing. So it's not about being sexist towards Harris. It's not being anti-black or Indian or whatever she's claiming to be this week. It's not about that. It's about her ideas. Her ideas were awful, if she had any, right? Literally, the Democrats said, yeah, she doesn't need a platform because all they had was she's not Trump, right? That was her platform for quite some time. And so this party that emphasizes diversity and tolerance had very little diversity and was extremely intolerant. Uh, Now, if you were part of the Party, Democrat Party, that coalition, and you're a little bit upset by what I'm saying, probably not because you're listening to this podcast, but let's just say you were one of those people and you were like, no, that's not what we are. Well, yeah, I mean, if you focus only on the language, nothing else, right? No evidence or anything beyond the actual words that you're using, then you can really easily be fooled. But if you examine how things play out, then the game is up, right? In churches, there used to be the saying a long time ago when they would talk about certain practices in the Christian church. They would say they were a mile wide and an inch deep, right? So they talked about everything, but nothing of substance. There was no deep thought. There's no consideration of reality or contradiction and even of consequence. So take, for example, LGBTQ, right? We won't even go on all the other ones, not that I really kept track of it. But the B in LGBTQ stands for bi. Bi, you're saying there are only two genders, which is kind of weird, right? Because the next letter is T, and they said that no, there's more than, right? And then you got the L, which is supposed to be for lesbian, but of course, a lot of the trans movement is anti-woman. So as long as you keep things extremely superficial, right? You don't think about it too much, then it gives the appearance that everyone is welcome there, right? And that they are the super tolerant because they're going to tolerate people who are normally considered fringe or marginalized people groups. No, they're the center now. And so everyone, since you already are in the center, then it's just a matter of accepting them. But if you start talking about it a little bit more, then you realize that they don't get along with each other, that they actually contradict. The concepts contradict each other, right? Well, you can't have one and the other because they are in conflict. And so their movement attracts people who really don't think. There is no deep thinking there. It's sort of like I mentioned this before, where I had students who relished the thought of punching a Nazi, right? There was that trending thing for a while. Is it okay to punch a Nazi? And you know, I had a bunch of students say, "Yeah, man, yeah, we gotta punch those Nazis, right? Because they deserve it." You know, but none of them knew what a Nazi was, and so they were actually pretty shocked when they realized that they were the Nazis, right? Because Nazi is just simply the first two syllables of the German word for national, national, right? National is the way that you say national in German, but you don't want to say uh, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterspartei every time you want to talk about Hitler's party. So you just took the first two syllables of that National Socialist German Workers' Party, right? Instead of saying the whole thing, you just say Nazi, right? That's where it came from, right? A lot of people didn't know that. And so basically, if you're a socialist, you're closer to being a Nazi than someone who's a freedom absolutist like I am. So they claim to be tolerant, but yet they yell and scream at people who disagree with them. Oh, okay, I guess that's the way you practice tolerance. And then they say they're anti-hate, but they hate a lot of different people, right? And they also hate Trump. And they don't see the hypocrisy at all. And we talked about this with the whole projection that they do and how it relates to hypocrisy. Because projection is basically, normalized hypocrisy, right? It's like hypocrisy in the open. It's in your face, and they truly cannot see it. It really is kind of a narrow subjectivity where nothing they do is wrong, even when they do wrong. So within freedom is where you find true diversity, right? Everyone who wants to be left alone. Now, those people are interesting, right? Because, they don't care what other people are doing. They're not trying to fit in. They're not trying to satisfy other people's expectations. They just want to be left alone. Now, keeping in mind, yeah, I mean, everyone wants friends. Everyone wants to be part of a group, but a group on their terms, right? They don't want to be like, okay, your choices are LGBTQ plus or LGBTQ plus, right? Like you got one choice, and now you got to be just like us. No, that it just doesn't work that way. And so people who are pro freedom, they were like, yeah, I want to be socially liberal and religiously conservative. Yeah, we can do that. You know, you can have any kind of subgrouping categorization that you want, right? You can be American Ninja TV show contestant, hopeful, and at the same time, you can have a PhD in engineering, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. You can do anything that you want. And those people who are pro freedom, pro free speech, and all that good stuff, they want to explore their creativity. They want to explore things that are different and interesting. They want to innovate, right? They want to solve problems, overcome problems, make their world a better place. Right. And the other side of the coin, of course, the other side of the table or the world, you can only be diverse this way. Like if you're not diverse this way, then you're just evil, which is exactly the opposite, right? It reminds me of the business school pitch competitions that, we did a crossover. I don't know if you heard that episode, but we did a crossover with my humanities classes did a crossover with the business school. And, all the other professors were basically socialists or communists, uh, self-proclaimed, of course. It's not me calling them that. That's what they call themselves. And we would go to the pitch comp. And so basically at the beginning of every semester, you know, uh, you're supposed to try to get your students to solve these great social problems like poverty, which always made me laugh, right? It's like you got people all over the world trying to solve poverty and homelessness, and we still got it. But no, these undergraduate students who are drunk half the time, yeah, they're going to come up with a solution for that. Right. Okay. And I always would laugh, and I'm like, okay, but in my sections, I would always say, look, that's the way they're going to do it. This is the way we're going to do it. And so when we got to the pitch competition, right? Everyone else's classes always pitched the same exact so-called innovative idea, the same exact ones. And it was so bad too, because I knew that they would always win, even though it was the same idea that won the last year. And I think that's why they stopped, because they just couldn't get that creativity. They didn't get any different ideas. It was always the same idea over and over again. Whereas my sections horrified the judges, right? Because they were just so out there, right? Even, and one my favorite one, which I'll never forget, is the smoker-friendly student housing, right? Which, you know, horrified all of the judges because the campus just went smoke-free. And so then they were suggesting smoker-friendly student housing for all the smokers that are still out there. A lot of the people, including some of the faculty, they confessed to me later after they were shocked and appalled, right? They came to me later and said, that actually is a pretty good idea. And I'm like, I know, that's why we pitched it. But that's the thing, right? So if you are going to have this sort of coerced diversity, there is no diversity. All of you are thinking the same thing, and you're all going to try to be the same. But with freedom, see, the difference is that you work on yourself first, and then you share the ideas that you came up with. Sometimes your idea will be the best, and sometimes other people's ideas will be better than yours, and you'll be happy, to drop your idea because the other ideas are that much better, it's cheaper, faster, it works better. And so you get to share ideas that way. And maybe other people think your idea is better, but you think other people's ideas are better. Well, then sure, exchange. You find your people. And then you create, you make the world a better place. I mean, you saw this in the beginning of the internet era. People who had the most obscure hobbies, they were able to network and then they formed groups online. People who never would have been able to meet each other. Now you could sort of be able to meet each other online. And obviously, people started doing it to hook up and all that other kind of stuff. But still, you are able to find your people, right? And so this is the thing, and this is what's so interesting to me about the whole Trump campaign, that once people took the time to find out about Trump the man, which was possible through all of those podcasts, then you saw more diversity among the voters who voted for Trump. And so, in other words, you get this organic, natural diversity if you respect freedom, if you prioritize freedom. It's basically the story of the free market, right? And that's why I'm still riding on that hope train. You hear all these rumors of who he might appoint in his cabinet, but it might just all be misinformation. Just like JD Vance came out of nowhere, right? Everyone thought he was going to pick Rubio. That guy's name keeps coming up, Rubio, Rubio. But nope, went over to JD Vance and a surprise pick. And I'm hoping lots of hopium over here that he's going to do that with pretty much every single cabinet post. Like when he comes out, it's just going to hopefully be a cabinet that will gut the government. At least that's my hope. It's my fantasy. Anyway, that's how I go to sleep at night. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.